Hey, what's up guys? Hello, with Football Talk here. After putting up my video predicting all the major NFL awards earlier this week, I'll now get to how I think the playoff picture will look like at the end of the 2020 season. To evaluate that, I predicted all 256 games with consideration of travel, time of preparation, and other advantages one team may have over their opponent. First, I will present the 7 teams from each conference, and then work my way through the different rounds of the playoffs, all the way up to Super Bowl 55. By the way, it also still feels weird to me to put 7 teams up there in each conference, but if you're interested about how I got to this point, or maybe see where a team ended up if they're not part of this list, I've added the full Excel table on my page hostforfootballtalk.com. But now let's get into how I think the playoff picture will look like. And we'll start things out with the NFC side of things. For the NFC, I think it will be a gauntlet once again in 2020, with one more playoff spot up for grabs, which should be hotly contested. According to my predictions, there will be 5 double-digit win teams, with one division failing to send a team that has accomplished that feat. There should be a battle for that 7th seed, with 3 teams right there in the hunt, and just 1 win away from getting into the tournament. For me personally, I always seem to have the high-seeded teams with a relatively conservative win total, since I might be too much of a believer in competitive football, but this year in particular, with no big home field advantages and how loaded the NFC is as a whole, I have no team winning more than 12 games. But let's get into a 7th seed, the Arizona Cardinals. This final playoff berth was in direct competition between 2 teams in the West, Arizona and Seattle. While I have been down on the Seahawks at times before, and Russell Wilson routinely finds a way to amaze me again with how he carries them to a winning record, I actually went into this thinking that the Hawks would be part of the playoff picture after the Jamal Adams trade, but just going week by week, I have them at 9-7, and in that case Arizona would have the better record against the division and the conference. Seattle might be the better team overall, but Arizona gets to play Detroit and Carolina instead of Atlanta and Minnesota for the Seahawks. With Cliff Kingsbury and Kyler Murray coming into year 2 of their partnership, DeAndre Hopkins being added as an elite wideout, and the defense really getting restructured this offseason, with no major contributors being lost in the process, they are bound to make a jump in my opinion. Next up, a 10-6 team, and as you can tell now, I have them coming up just short of winning the division, the Philadelphia Eagles. Even if I don't have them earning that home playoff game, I think they'll be a tough draw. They have what I believe is a quarterback just outside the top 5 league-wide, an emerging second-year star back. They've added so much speed to the wide receiver position, which they desperately lacked last year and was a huge issue for them. And despite the injuries they have suffered already this offseason, which are kind of crazy to me, they still have a solid offensive line at least. When you look at the defensive side of the ball, they did lose some veterans this offseason, and the second level to me doesn't instill a lot of confidence. But you look at 2 guys they brought in, Darius Slay, the true number 1 corner for them, and Javon Hargrave, he can plug the middle of that line. Those guys certainly help. As always, the big question here for Philadelphia, can they stay healthy? But with how much I expect this offense to open up, why wouldn't they win 1 more game than they did last season, when over the second half of the year, they had practice squad guys catching passes? Alright, let's get into what maybe is this year's biggest offseason hype team, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Unlike a lot of these teams that really get hyped up because of all the additions they make over the offseason, I think Tampa Bay already at the base of a really good team. I think they pretty clearly have the league's best receiver duo, a 3-headed monster at tight end, some talented backs, even now adding in Leonard Fournette, which I didn't even take into consideration when making these predictions, an above average offensive line, and now just replace the guy who actually led the league in turnovers by a wide margin last season with maybe the greatest quarterback of all time, who I still believe has some stuff left in the tank. However, what makes me a believer even more so maybe is the defense. They already finished last season as the top-ranked run D. They also have a premier edge rusher duo, 2 super rangy linebackers, and a young up-and-coming secondary. Well, we still have to see how quickly the offense can actually pick things up. There were some reports already about Brady not being quite on the same page with his receivers. 11-5 might seem a little high, and I actually have the Bucs just 1 in-division win away from the conference's top seed, but I don't see why they wouldn't be able to make that improvement. Now we'll get into the division winners, and the only division in this conference to not have a team win double-digit games is the North, with the team that I actually think will make it to the postseason being the Green Bay Packers. I don't think there's really a bad team in this division, with the range being between 7 and 9 wins when I look at my predictions, and I actually think this is the only group where I could see any of the 4 win it potentially. For the Packers in particular, dropping all the way down here after finishing last season with a 13-3 record and making it to the NFC Championship game has more to do with them being due for regression in terms of their success rate in one-score games, as they were 8-1 in 2019 in those. While I don't love what they have added this offseason, and the old saying, if you don't get better, you get worse, does hold true to some point, they also didn't lose too many pieces. And when I look at the NFC North, what gives the Packers the edge here is that they have the best quarterback and pass rush inside the division, in my opinion. So I have them at 9-7 here, all the other teams though very close. And at number 3, one of the most talented teams in the entire league, the Dallas Cowboys. I think it'll be a really tough race for the NFC East crown, with 2 excellent teams, with them and the Eagles, that easily have the talent to challenge for the conference's top seed. But in the end, I see the Cowboys getting the better end of the deal this year. The offense is absolutely loaded, with as much skill position talent as any other team in the league. They're at least around the top 5 offensive line conversation. And Dak Prescott, while he may not be able to carry a team necessarily, in this situation, he can just take advantage of all the pieces he has around him. We still have to see what exactly the secondary will look like, with more press being played on the outside and aggressive play calling overall under new defensive coordinator Mike Nolan, but they could have a very deep rotation up front on the D-line and 2 heat-seeking missiles on the second level if Leighton Vander is back to full health. If new head coach Mike McCarthy can get this team to just show up in the big matchups and play up to their potential, this team can be scary. And with the top 2 seeds, I have 2 12-4 teams, and it actually just came down to the direct matchup between the two. I have the 49ers finishing second in this race here. They do win the same amount of games, like I said, but due to losing the rematch of last year's high-scoring thriller to the number 1 team, they now have to play on wildcard weekend under the new playoff format. San Francisco has an outstanding all-around team when it comes to the roster they have constructed, the way they have retained pretty much the entire coaching staff this offseason. And when I look at what they have done since having to drive home as the losers of the Super Bowl, they've done a great job retooling for the few losses they did have, and might have actually improved in some areas here after a dominant playoff run up to the Super Bowl. My 2 areas of concern for San Francisco is the receiving corps due to health questions, now with Deebo Samuel probably missing some time, Brandon Ayuk's already been banged up, we'll still have to see what happens there, and that second corner spot I think will still be up for grabs. However, I don't see a Super Bowl hangover being an issue for this team in particular. And with that, we get to a number 1 seed, the New Orleans Saints, and I do only project them to win 12 games. But I think it will be enough for the Saints to emerge as the number 1 seed in the NFC, since they win that direct matchup with San Francisco, and they might actually have one of the best teams we've ever seen recently that doesn't just steamroll their opponents in the conference just because of how good the NFC is. But don't let that take away from the Saints themselves. With Drew Brees having his final shot at the Lombardi Trophy, Emmanuel Sanders as a dependable number 2 being added, more veterans on defense also being thrown into the mix, and the depth they have throughout the roster to go with what I believe is an excellent coaching staff, they're as complete as it gets. When I think about this upcoming season in particular, with the whole COVID situation, it does bring some advantages and disadvantages for New Orleans, because I believe their continuity and experience will be a huge plus, but not having fans roaring in the dome, that also hurts. Even though hearing Drew yell out all those signals might almost be intimidating for opponents. And with that being said, let's get to a couple of teams that just missed the cut. Like I already mentioned, the Seattle Seahawks in a tough battle with Arizona unfortunately lose out because they have a worse conference and in-division record, but I could easily see them at 10-6 as well and prove me wrong once again. And then the Atlanta Falcons and the Detroit Lions, both at 8-8. The Falcons just needed to win one more game against NFC opponents to earn that final wildcard berth. And if the Lions win one more in-division game, they are in ahead of the Packers. So I'll believe the Vikings and Bears won of bad seasons. The Lions, if the team believes in Patricia, can make some noise here. Let's move over to the AFC. And for this group, I think there are 2 clear frontrunners. As I have stated in my power rankings 2 weeks ago, you can check that video out later. I actually think the other 2 divisions will also bring out double-digit win champions. And there's one more very dangerous team that earns that first wildcard spot. After those top 5 basically, there are 3 teams that are tied at 9-7, where things can get a little complicated with certain tiebreakers depending on how the games actually shake out, plus another 8-8 squad that is one more in-conference win away from earning that 6th or 7th seed. But now let's get into the teams that actually made it. With that 7th seed, the Cleveland Browns. I'm a little bit back on the hype train. At 9-7, where I actually have them, I wouldn't say that they will take the league by storm or anything like that, but there are several tangible factors that make me believe they will be a much more consistent organization. With new head coach Kevin Stefanski coming in and installing his offense, I think that will be a much better fit for their personnel and their quarterback in particular. as we have seen over small stretches with Baker as a rookie, when Freddie Kitchens used a lot more 12 personnel and built things around the run game. Before last season, they went back to more spread sets. When you look at the first two additions the Browns made this offseason with tight end Austin Hooper and fullback Andy Janovich, those are already signs to expect much more heavy personnel, and the play-action game to a major factor here. They also get back my choice for Defensive Player of the Year, which I already talked about earlier this week, Myles Garrett. He will lead a young, hungry group, and I just think getting humbled last season, it'll do them good, without having all the hype around them this offseason. Cleveland grabs that final wildcard spot, but it is very tight with another team, and they only get in because they have a better conference record. I'll get to that in a little bit. With that, let's move on to a 6th seed, the Denver Broncos. And it's funny how we see a couple of young teams every year with a quarterback coming into his second season and having added more weapons around him that we expect to make that big jump the next season. For the NFC, my team is the Cardinals, and for the AFC, it's the Broncos. The sample size for quarterback Drew Lock is very small, but he did go 4-1 over the final 5 games of 2019 and showed a lot of promise to me. With Cortland Sutton emerging as a superstar, Noah Fant looking to take that next step forward, 2 tremendous rookie receivers, a great 1-2 punch out of the backfield, and an improved interior O-line, he should have pretty much anything he needs to succeed. On defense, they get back Bradley Chubb, they added Jarrell Casey for peanuts basically, and they bring back everybody else from what was already a top 10 scoring unit last season. I'm just a little worried about that duo of offensive tackles going up against the top pass rushers in that division. And the top wildcard seed here goes to the Pittsburgh Steelers, a group that I expect to rebound in 2020, and we didn't get to see a lot of what they will look like at full force, with Ben Roethlisberger being knocked out for the season early on in week 2, but we did get to see what they look like with the worst quarterback play in the league, and they still went 8-8. I've shared my thoughts on the 2 guys who filled in for Big Ben last season before. I don't want to get back into that, but what it comes down to is the offense should go from incapable to move the ball for whole games to potentially be in the top 10 unit, with Juju rebounding and all those young weapons emerging, while the defense, they were already elite last season. And the defense, they were already elite last season with a league-leading 54 sacks. They also led the league with 38 takeaways, and there is really no reason why they shouldn't be as good again, with much less pressure on them to win them games. And that brings us to our division winners. Coming out of the South for me, a team that I'm buying coming into the year, the Indianapolis Colts. And when it comes to the outlook for 2020, I actually have to go back to 2019 first. Until starting quarterback Jacoby Brissett got hurt late in the first half of the Week 9 game against the Steelers, Indy had a 5-2 record with the number 2 seed in the AFC actually, ahead of the Chiefs or Ravens. And they also won all 3 games against what turned out to be playoff teams in the Titans, Chiefs and Texans. They only won 2 more games from that point on, with the backup QB and the banged up Brissett. But now moving forward to this offseason, when they bring in a veteran signal caller with something to prove in Phillip Rivers, trading for a top 50 player in the league in DeForest Buckner to boost the defense, adding 2 stud second round picks with Jonathan Taylor and Michael Pittman Jr., and bringing back pretty much everybody else notable, they could have easily been a playoff team last season, and I think they are actually better this year. However, at 10-6, the other 3 teams in the conference to win the division finished with a better record, and right ahead of them, at 11-5, I have the Buffalo Bills. If you ask me for that one team that I like best outside of the 2 conference favorites, I'll go with Buffalo. They already went 10-6 last season when they were coming off a 6-10 finish with question marks about the quarterback and the weapons that he had around him, plus also no major stars necessarily on either side of the ball. And while Josh Allen is still somewhat of a controversial name due to his up and down nature of play to some degree, he did show a lot of positive signs last season, and now with Stephon Diggs as his number 1 receiver, who not only opens up the offense with his vertical prowess, but also pushes everybody else on the depth chart down 1 spot, then you have a 2-headed backfield that I like a lot, and at least an average offensive line, that sounds much better already. And then you look at the defense, they already finished 2nd in the NFL in points allowed before they even added depth to the D-line, drafting AJ Epinesa, signing Mario Addison and all those guys. To me, they are the clear favorites to win the East. That brings us to the top 2 teams, and I think everybody expected them to be here. It's just about the order now. And I have the Kansas City Chiefs at number 2 here. We've heard this a lot this offseason. The Chiefs bring back 19 of 22 starters on offense and defense combined. In the end, they didn't lose offensive coordinator Eric Bieniemy, who should have gotten a head coach position this offseason. All the stars are happy now that they're on the new contracts. and they have the best player in the league who are already predicted to win MVP earlier this week. They do have a pretty thin secondary, and they have to travel to what I believe are the 4 best teams on the schedule, with Baltimore, Buffalo, Tampa Bay, and New Orleans. But outside of the Ravens, I think they are a notch above all the other AFC contenders, and the decisive factor between them and the number 1 seed in the end was the direct matchup in Week 3, which I already called the best of all 256 games on the schedule. And I've kind of given them away already, but to no surprise for anybody, the Baltimore Ravens at number 1. I think they are the one team that really stands out as a favorite to put up the league's best record once again. Yes, they did lose a Hall of Fame guard in Marshall Yanda. The division should be much better as a whole, and it'll be tough for Lamar Jackson to recreate that historically great season. But in terms of the franchise as a whole, I just don't have any major questions with them. The Ravens roster to me is even better and deeper than it was a year ago. They have so much continuity with the coaching staff. The additions they've made this offseason with Calais Campbell, Derek Wolfe on the D-line, J.K. Dobbins is a stud rookie running back, more depth on the O-line, I think it just fit perfectly. And going for the schedule, the 2 teams they lost to outside of their division last year will have to come to Baltimore this time around, even if home field advantage won't be such a huge deal without the fans. So the Ravens and Chiefs really stand out, 3 more double-digit win teams, and then there's a tough battle for the last 2 wildcard spots, and the one team that actually lost out with that 9-7 record as well, the Tennessee Titans. Full transparency, when I went through the schedule the first time around, I actually had the Titans in, and I didn't quite understand how it worked since I applied all the tiebreakers, but then I put it into playoffpredictor.com, which I highly recommend you check out. Even had to contact the guy who runs the page, who had to work through it a couple of days himself to quite grasp what's going on, because you had the tiebreaker between 3 teams with the same record, and how you had to work down on those, but if one category doesn't fit all of them, you have to move back to the start again and all that kind of stuff. Crazy how that goes. But when I worked through it again, I actually had the Browns beating the Titans in their direct matchup, but the Titans still a very good team. They just won 9-7 last season though, and I don't think they got much better. They basically trying to run it back, and I think will be right up there, but didn't quite make the cut for me. And then the Las Vegas Raiders, if they win one more in-conference game, they could actually move all the way up to the 6th seed, or the 7th seed, depending on who they actually win against. But I think 8-8 is fair for them. They are still not quite where they want to be, but so many weapons added on the offensive side of the ball. They address the linebacker level. I like what they are doing. But with that being said, let's actually work our way through the different rounds of the playoffs. In the wildcard round, I have the matchups now. With the first matchup on the NFC side of things, the Bucs traveling to Green Bay, even though I actually have them winning 2 more games than the Packers over the course of the regular season. And this is actually a rematch of the Week 6 meeting, when the Bucs get to host the Packers and win that crucial game. The battle between 2 all-time great quarterbacks in Tom Brady and Aaron Rodgers. It'll be a fascinating one. But in the end, I believe Tampa has better playmakers and a more complete, versatile defense that won't allow Green Bay to keep up. So Bucs is my pick here. And then we get to our first of 2 divisional matchups for the first round of the playoffs here, both on the NFC side of things. I already discussed how the Cowboys secure the NFC East crown with a big Week 16 win at home against the Birds, and then just 2 weeks later, Philly actually gets a chance for revenge. And this time around, I believe the Eagles will actually come out on the winning end. Of course, this is assuming health for Carson Wentz and some other key players, but as much as Wentz's injury problems have been discussed, we have not seen him shrink in the playoffs, and there are still several of the veterans from the Super Bowl run 3 years ago. While Dallas, they haven't really shown up in the postseason, or many other big-time matchups for that matter. And then the second division rivalry that we get in the wildcard round, San Francisco hosting Arizona. I actually have them splitting the season series with the home and home, with the Cardinals coming up with a huge W in Week 16 that lifts them above the third team in that division with Seattle, and it keeps the 49ers from a chance to earn the conference's number 1 seed. In this third matchup, however, Kyle Shanahan's well-designed run game is too much to handle for the Cardinals, and Nick Bosa and company find a way to overwhelm a below-average offensive line. We have seen this team kick it up a notch in January, and I think the same will be the case here. And with that, we move back to the AFC. First, we have the Steelers traveling to Indianapolis. This is actually another rematch of Week 16, when the Colts have to travel to Heinz Field and lose in the swirling Pennsylvania wind. While I really like the Colts as a team with a clear identity, this is a tough draw for them, since their biggest strength, the offensive line and the run game, is somewhat neutralized by Pittsburgh's nasty front 7. I could see Deontay Johnson maybe come up with a deep bomb early on to open things up, and then Big Ben finds a way to pick apart this rather simplistic Indy defense. Then it's Broncos going to Buffalo, and it is Week 15, but we get to see the first version of this matchup late in the season as well, which is beautiful how all these things come together. The Bills have to travel to Denver in the high altitude and lose a hard-fought battle in that one, but this time around with the Broncos having to travel to Buffalo, and even though it sucks they don't have the Bills Mafia in the stands for them, this group is still tough to beat at home. With the deep D-line rotation Buffalo has against two question mark tackles and Sean McDermott's well-coordinated zone coverage, forcing Drew Lock to hold on to the ball, to go with an up-tempo offense from Brian Daboll that attacks certain matchup, I like the Bills here. And then the last game of Wildcard Weekend, the reigning Super Bowl champs hosting an up-and-coming Browns team. While I like the formula Cleveland will try to use, similar to what the Titans had success with in the first half of the AFC Championship game, I can't go against Mahomes and company here. Just too many weapons out there against what is still a young secondary for Cleveland, and I think the Honey Badger will find a way to trick Baker Mayfield once in this game to help the Chiefs create some separation. I can't wait to see the footage of when these two quarterbacks battled out in a shootout in college though. And with this we advance to the second round of the playoffs. Back over in the NFC, we get a treat with Tom Brady facing the guy Bill Belichick wanted to replace him with in New England. And now this offseason there were reports about how the 49ers were thinking about doing the exact opposite with Jimmy Garoppolo. So that's that storyline first of all. As far as the game goes, as much as I like Kyle Shanahan and the Niners defense, I think the Bucs are on a roll at this point of the year and advance to the Final Four. If San Francisco's D-line can get to Brady at a high rate and they can get the edge in the run game themselves, I like their chances. But the Bucs will be tough to run on, and nothing the Niners do in coverage in that Seattle scheme will confuse the GOAT. And then, I think the number one seeded Saints won't have too much trouble with the Eagles. Carson Wentz will make some big plays to keep them in the game for the first half, but New Orleans is basically better at every other position on the field. The Eagles will actually experience what it feels like to lose the battle in the trenches on both sides of the ball, which they have done to the opposition a lot of their big games in the past. And there are some matchups that the Saints can take advantage of, like Alvin Kamara going up against a really inexperienced linebacker corps for Philly. And as far as the AFC goes, with the Chiefs hosting the Bills, the reigning champs face a tough task here on the road to another Super Bowl, since I already have them losing in Buffalo in a big spot on Sunday Night Football in Week 6. And this won't be an easy one, as Buffalo has the ability to force Mahomes and company to have to methodically work their way down the field, and they can punish them if they get over-aggressive, while the Chiefs don't really have anybody on defense to match up with Stephon Diggs. However, in the end, I think KC will try to make this a shootout, and I bank on Josh Allen making at least one bad decision in the game. And we do get one more divisional matchup from the AFC in the second round of the playoffs here, and it's a dandy. Baltimore-Pittsburgh to me is the best rivalry in all the NFL, and to have them go up against each other in the playoffs for the first time since 2015, that makes things even more intense. The Ravens do get to host this game, of course, as the AFC's top seed, but at that point I think we will have seen two close brawls over the course of the regular season, with each team winning at home. Ultimately, the difference in this one for me will be Baltimore's ability to make Pittsburgh one-dimensional, and the Ravens secondary being too tough to crack for this young group of pass catchers, so Lamar gets his first play of victory. And now we get to Conference Championship Sunday, with the Bucs and the Saints as another divisional matchup. These two teams start the season against each other week 1, and in my projections, they also decide who represents the NFC in the Super Bowl. While I do have concerns about Drew Brees' arm falling off at the end of the year, and this being a tough matchup for New Orleans' ground game, I also believe that the Saints are a little better as a whole. The Bucs will find ways to make plays on offense, but Sean Payton will also create favorable matchups for his receivers against what is still a young secondary, and I have more confidence in New Orleans' offensive line keeping Drew clean than I have for the Bucs keeping Cam Jordan and all those guys off Tom. And in the AFC title game, with the Chiefs going up against the Ravens, one of the best matchups that we see every year in the regular season, and I think it will be another great game in Week 3. Already talked about how Ravens get the number 1 seed by actually winning that game at home, but now 3 months later, I still like Baltimore coming through. At this point, Lamar is 0-2 against Mahomes, but both those matchups were in Kansas City, and at those points, I would have said that the Chiefs were a little better. Baltimore's secondary is as good as it's ever been in the series, and they can somewhat blanket those KC speedsters, and then for the Ravens, their rushing attack, it'll once again be a nightmare to slow down. We've seen that the teams who want to beat the Chiefs have to play keeper with Mahomes, and the Ravens can do that, while also making a few stops by changing things up post-snap defensively and confusing Mahomes maybe. So now we've arrived at the big game, with the Ravens going up against the Saints. There are so many great storylines. It's Drew Brees trying to win that second Lombardi and riding off into the sunset against Lamar Jackson, trying to become the next young phenom to go from winning an MVP to securing a Super Bowl the next season. When these offensive and defensive lines collide with each other, for both those teams, it might actually create a black hole. That matchup between Sean Payton and Ravens DC Wink Martindale, it will also be a fascinating one, as both are known for their aggressive and creative play calling to keep the opposition off balance. We get Michael Thomas versus Marcus Peters Part 2, Mark Ingram going up against his former team, other long-time veterans striving for the first championship trophy, and maybe even a trick play on special teams, especially with John Harbaugh pulling the strings for Baltimore. Ultimately, the difference here for me will be Lamar's ability to improvise and create a couple of plays to swing momentum in the Ravens' favor, but this should be a tightly contested, physical game that I would just love to see. So for me, the final score, Ravens 26, Saints 23, would truly be one heck of a game. And that's a wrap. We have predicted the entire 2020 NFL season, all the awards, which the video should pop up any second now, and the playoff predictions all the way to Super Bowl 55. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, just share it with one football crazy friend of yours. You can also check out my other videos here on this channel, or go to my page, helloswithfootballtalk.com. All my social media is linked down below if you want to contact me. And I'll be back after week 1, probably with one statement for every single game or team. So until then, see you later. Peace!